Good evening, YouTube, and welcome back to Youth Views Sunday live stream. I am Harry Khan, as usual, at the deck, at the laptop this week, in fact, covering another quite a lively week of politics. COVID-19 has certainly had a lot to say in the world, and everything is absolutely being dominated by that. We'll be talking a little bit later around, obviously, the very concerning death rate and the 100,000 tests a day promise by the Health Secretary. We'll also be talking a little bit later around the BBC documentary around COVID-19 and the PPE supplies and the concerns around that. We'll be talking a little bit around closer to home with the Labour Party and the news in terms of what has come out following the leaked report and the NEC reaction to that. We'll also be talking a little bit about Dianne Abbott and her mate Belle Ribeiro, who've got into a little bit of trouble this week for joining a Zoom call. And we'll also move on to how the Majesty's official opposition is getting on in respect to the new leadership. And also, towards the end of the show, we want to talk a little bit about independent media and how.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry to cut you off mid-flow, mate. But John, I don't know if it's just me, mine, but we're getting a bit of feedback from your mic.
Okay, I'll mute myself then.
Would you probably be all right to mute yourself? Yeah.
Yeah,
just for the benefit of the viewers.
I'm just opening some of the tabs that let's see of the today's topics, but yeah.
Thank you. So, really, I should be introducing our panel. No doubt YouTubers are familiar with our panel, that now join us often on a Sunday. First and foremost, John Cooper, how are we doing? I think you can unmute at this point.
Yeah. I'm doing fine. And as you can see, I've got a new avatar of a cute little bat. No, granted, that might be a controversial pick in today's times. Okay?
John Cooper, ever the controversial. And Tom, you've stuck with your Labour Party avatar. How are you doing in Wales?
Oh, I'm quite well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I'm not too bad. Can't complain. Still surviving and still alive. And I think in this day and age, if you can say you're surviving and alive, then it's better than a lot of things. And Captain Swiss, last but not least, certainly, you've been streaming quite a fair bit on the COVID-19 issue, haven't you, of late?
I have, partly through lack of anything better to do at this current moment in time. But you've got to fill the hours in somehow, haven't you?
There is a lot, and actually, anybody who uses this platform, StreamYard, will see the message that pops up as soon as you log in that a lot of people are doing a lot of streaming at the moment and using a lot of YouTube's bandwidth. And Captain Swiss is certainly one of those individuals as well. So blame him if your laptops and computers are slow, your internet speeds are not kicking. So yeah, let's start with COVID-19, Swiss. I think. The current deaths that I got off Google this afternoon was 28,446, if I'm not correct, in the UK. 182,000 cases of positive. Clearly, with the current sort of uplift in testing, which we'll get onto in a minute as well, those cases are clearly going to be a lot more evident. But in comparison to the rest of, well, not in comparison, but fitting into the rest of the world, 3.5 million cases and 244,000 deaths worldwide, Swiss. 28,446 out of 244k. Quite a chunk of that number there, isn't it, Swiss?
It is, yeah. We're certainly one of the how would you want to place it? One of the highest affected countries out there. I know that there's. Oh, excuse me, with this phone trying to notify me while I'm talking. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Obviously, when you see some of the graphs that are out there as well, comparatively in Europe, you'd place us along in the same kind of camp as Italy, France, Spain, those kind of countries. But I think at the moment, I may be correct in saying that we we seem to be one of the worst. Obviously, not a patch on the United States; they're a case unto themselves at the moment. But certainly, as far as Europe's concerned, we're not having a very good time with it, are we?
No. And it's interesting, isn't it, Swiss, in respect of the media sort of display of we were a week or two behind Italy, weren't we? And it was almost reported as so devastating. And we're there, really, if you think about it, in terms of the numbers. We're not really too far behind. Granted, they're ahead in terms of they had cases of COVID-19 before the UK. But would you say that there's a bit of a downplaying in terms of it? Almost to me feels like these deaths are almost normalised now in terms of how it's being reported in the news.
I see where you're coming from, and in a sense they are, but also at the same time, in a sense, all of these deaths are the new normal. In a sense, we'd hit all of these. I don't know if you'd call them milestones or what exactly the right phrase would be, but they'd go, we've had 100 deaths, 1,000 deaths, 10,000 deaths, etc. But with the news in the past month and a half, largely it has just become a matter of daily reportings, this many more people with coronavirus, this many more deaths, and it can be tricky, can't it? When we're looking at things purely in terms of numbers, that can seem a little bit removed from the emotional impacts of what's actually going on out there. But I've noticed. I've noticed. I think it's Sky News at the very least. I don't know whether other news sites are doing it as well. But when they do their bulletins, there's occasionally they'll try and do a thing where it's like names and pictures of people who've passed away in the last day as well, and they'll say things like, this is Terry. He was a former miner, 75 years old, from Hull or something, and so on. So. There are efforts out there, I think, to try and keep a bit of a grounding in sort of the reality of this thing, but it is difficult just in the face of just the sheer scale of the thing,
Yeah. And Tom, you wonder if there may have been a bit of disbelief of how COVID-19 it may have been in the beginning. Nah, not over here. It can't be as bad as it was over in Italy, and it's interesting because we don't see many images. Although, as I keep comparing to Italy, because there's that sort of mini documentary on Sky News that keeps coming on the weekends, showing you right on the inside of the COVID wards and whatnot. Tom, have you seen much of the inside of the hospital stuff in the media or in the news?
Not particularly, no. This sort of like disbelief, as you mentioned, is still kind of felt around where I live, like living in the valley, quite disconnected. Now you hear the odd story about some friend's family member getting ill, but that's as far as it goes. We've yet to really experience it properly. You hear hospital wards are a bit crowded from people on the street and whatnot, but on the news, the coverage is fairly minimal. You get the odd, sort of display of deaths this week, as Swiss was saying, pictures of people who have died, unfortunately, and again, that's about all I seem to be hearing. Yeah,
and testing is something that we were going to talk about and go on to, and really silly of Matt Hancock. I think I would say that setting yourself a target, because you're almost if some of the way that actually some of the parts of the media being quite hostile towards him. We talked about Piers Morgan sort of on the last stream. Setting yourself a target of 100 tests per day. And by the end of
100,000.
Sorry, what did I say? Sorry, yeah.
You said 100.
Right, let's start that one again. Right, 100,000 tests per day. Matt Hancock had set himself the target, and it makes you think, really, Tom, doesn't it? Whether this was going to happen or not. But in the end, when the day after on the 1st of May, the figure reported was 122,000 tests per day that had been sort of reported, and BBC News were all sort of celebrating it along with the government as well. But Tom, there was some controversy around some of those figures, because straight away a lot of accusations around the government possibly fiddling those figures came out, didn't they? They said that the figure was more like 80k tests per day, yet it seems as if some of those 40,000 of them may have been still in the post. So, what do you make of that? Are you trusting of Matt Hancock on that 122k figures?
Well, the thing mere days ago, in the Keir Starmer's first Prime Minister's questions, they were saying they had a capacity for 30,000 tests, and yet we're only testing about 18,000 people. And I find it quite hard to believe that they've managed to reach 120,000 in that time, especially considering they have yet to resolve the issues regarding distribution of these tests, which, of course, they were facing back then as well. Like, for example, I'm pretty sure Keir Starmer was mentioning how a lot of key workers didn't have necessarily the transport to, especially in the cities, they had to get on public transport to get to these testing centres.
Yeah.
And of course, if you've got symptoms, COVID symptoms, going on public transport is not a good idea. So they had an issue of distributing the tests. And also, again, the point here stands is that 120,000, that doesn't seem right to me. In just a week, to increase your capacity by, 90,000 and then start testing that many, it doesn't seem right to me. And I'm not one for trusting the Tories, as you would probably guess. So I think there's got to be something a bit fishy there.
Yeah. And John, today they didn't hit the 100k figure that Matt Hancock had said that we would be doing, because obviously if you hit the milestone, the pressure was always going to be around maintaining that 100k per day.
From what I'm looking at, this article from the Sky right now is that apparently they've only managed to done 76,000 today or something.
I literally just about to say that. Yeah. So what are you thinking here? Are you thinking that there's a bit of a fiddle here, or is it an honest mistake?
Well, let's see. Given my bias, I'd probably say that they've botched it, really, they definitely botched at the beginning. But who knows? Some of the more harsher critics, I guess, will probably say that. Well, at least they're like only a quarter off from their target. But who knows, really? I mean, from what I can tell, let's see. I think there's apparently been an article from from the Evening Standard saying that Brits to be allowed more time outdoors as COVID-19 lockdown eases.
That's right, yeah. They're talking about that.
So I'm not sure, to be honest. So yeah, I haven't really been following COVID news, but given how this government has been previously handling it, I'd say they're probably botching it a bit and making some mistakes along the way. Goes well.
Did everyone happen to catch the BBC Panorama documentary last week?
Is that the one where it revealed home cares had have been poorly mishandled, and that our real death rate is closer to Italy's than we thought?
That's right. Yeah, it was focused also around the supply of PPE, personal protective equipment, where they basically uncovered mass failings from the government and the delivery of these, and basically said that the network is absolutely screwed, and in terms of the infrastructure and the preparation around sort of one of these potential pandemics, we were absolutely not prepared for. But Swiss, I don't know if you caught this aspect of the documentary. The thing that really sort of got me and really sort of resonated with me was the bit about how the government regraded this virus. With a view to potentially not having to have a legal sort of kind of threshold and provision of PPE, and so actually the provision that they did provide, they wouldn't have had a possible challenge for it because of that downgrading of the virus. Did you catch that bit of the documentary or not?
I need to be honest with you that I haven't had the chance to see the documentary. There's bits of what was in the documentary that I've read about since. I think something pertaining to the way that they were counting certain PPE items as a pair of gloves, counting as 2 individual PPEs rather than 1, or something like that. But could I just offer some thoughts on the? Yeah. Could I offer some thoughts on the testing quickly, just because I don't. I think we went over that before I had a chance to chip in. I think, first of all, before I say anything else, I think weeks ago when that testing target was set of 100k, obviously that was against the backdrop of a large amount of criticism towards the government for the fact that there hadn't been a large amount of testing going on. And you saw that across different facets of the press as well. It was even some traditionally Tory supporting newspapers, you were still getting them going, what's going on here, guys? Why isn't there enough testing? So I think that the fact that obviously in the month or so since they have managed to raise it by the amount they have, and we'll get onto the numbers in just a moment, I think that in itself is clearly a good thing. And we could probably all agree on that, obviously the more testing that there is going on, much better than the situation before. But yeah, as far as the numbers and drilling down into that a little bit, where I start to have slight issues is the way that these that the headline numbers are recorded, or at least the 122,000 on the day that was reported. It included, like, the breakdown of it basically included tests that had been sent off to the lab and come back and had results, tests that had been sent out to these different little drop-in points where you could be tested, tests that had been sent off in the post to people, but not necessarily a comment on whether they may have arrived yet or have been tested or have then been sent off to have been have the results processed, etc. So the 122k number from what I saw was very much sort of a catch-all for all tests within the lifetime of the testing process, from wherever it is that they're being stockpiled to being dispatched to being tested to getting the results back to people. Of the numbers that were released on that day, 122,000 tests, as they called it, but 73,000 people tested. So in that sense of where, and that's probably the metric that I choose to measure it on, people tested per day, including the processing of tests. Me too. Obviously that did fall short of what their target was. Now, like I say, the fact that the testing has still been increased dramatically, I'm very pleased to have seen that. And I wasn't necessarily going to quibble over, okay, they're 20,000 short than what they were supposed to be or something like that. But the issue that I do have is it's the self-congratulation. It was they were going, we absolutely blew the target out of the water. We've done absolutely amazing. We showed all the doubters wrong. Take that. Yeah, the gloating from certain corners of the government. That was what kind of niggled me a little bit. Just, I'm not trying to be uber partisan on this thing. I'm saying they've dramatically increased the testing. I think that's a very good thing. But just the fact that they tweaked the numbers ever so slightly to get there, and certainly in the days since we've seen it down a little bit from what it was before. Good, you've increased the testing, but don't try and sell us a golden goose when it's a regular battery farm standard chicken.
At least I'd say if you're going to boast, at least do make sure you're at least done at least more than, let's see, half of what you're gonna at least do, like at least another 20,000, 30,000, or 40,000 more than you were gonna test. So then you can brag.
I agree with your point there, John. But I would say that actually, just extending on Swiss's point, really, that boasting is probably the last thing you would do when you've probably got the second or third death rate, highest death rate in the world. Really, I think setting targets is a good thing, but I think really, I think personally, and folk know that I'm quite cynical at times when it comes to the government, but I think some of this is a bit diversion. I think Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson are sitting there absolutely rubbing their hands out there because people are talking about how the government may or may not have hit 100k tests, and that takes the subject away from the fact that we've had nearly 30,000 deaths in this country. Care homes is a massive problem that was, quite frankly, I think when you read quite forgotten. I think even the reporting of the deaths were only hospital deaths, where many countries around the world were or still are reporting total deaths. So I think that was a bit of a tactic, really, because quite frankly, I mean, even the chief medical officer said at the beginning of this crisis, he said if we get 20,000 deaths, it will be a good result. However, I'm not sure how you can call it a good result, but we're heading into sort of nearly 30,000 deaths Swiss, and when is this going to end?
Well, obviously, the number of deaths that we're getting per day now, it's not quite at the same rate as it was a few weeks ago. I think we were round about the point of getting 1,000 deaths a day at one point in time, and we seem to have gone down from that. But even though we talk about being past the peak, there's a sort of a plateau after the peak, and it's not just going to be if you imagine like the peak suddenly jumping up and then coming back down again just as quickly. We get up to the peak and then it's a very gradual slide back down towards.
I mean, we could be decreased. So in other words, you're saying even though we might be decreasing numbers, we're still getting like 2,000 deaths per day or something.
Well, not quite at that level necessarily, but the point being that the point being that the rate of increase, the rate is no longer going up. If anything, the rate is going down. But obviously, that still means day on day you're getting additional deaths and the like. I'd say, and this is the thing I've got. I certainly have criticism to level towards the government on this, because there are a number of things I think that they could have done a lot sooner than they did end up doing. And certainly playing around with numbers along the way doesn't help. But it's probably also worth, just as a sort of context, if you will, that I think the projections for a do nothing scenario, and keep in mind, I'm not even talking about the so-called herd immunity Dominic Cummings plan here. I'm talking about a genuine do nothing scenario, like not even elderly shielding or anything like that. I think that may have projected something to the tune of 200,000 deaths or 300,000 deaths. So again, not to take away from the severity of what we're dealing with at the moment, but I think we can still point to say, okay, measures have been taken. Were they taken too late? Could more have been done? Certainly. But nonetheless, the things that have been done have had a very tangible effect on how this thing has gone, and it's less bad than it could have been.
Absolutely. Tom, anything do you want to say on the BBC Panorama documentary? I'm not sure if you caught it.
Not particularly. I haven't actually seen it, so
never mind.
I would definitely recommend it to you guys. And it's only half an hour. It's a 30-minute watch. But
if you've seen it, shall we flip this round for a moment? Shall I ask you about the documentary?
Go on, yeah.
And what you thought of it. So, I mean, not having seen
in Swiss style, yeah.
let me put the hosting hat on for just a sec. So, so you saw the documentary. Like I'd said, one of the only tidbits that I'd taken away from it was this counting of the PPE numbers and stuff like that. But I think you'd touched on it exposing some kind of a larger failing with the overall. I think the delivery infrastructure of PPE or testing or something like that. Do you just want to speak for a moment about like what it is that you saw? And I don't know, did the documentary give any indications of where they were failing and what they could have done better with it? Or
what they were talking about, Swiss, was procurement, really, and how the systems are totally out of date in respect. So you know, when we hear in the news, it's all about the numbers, and obviously they were talking about the double counting of the gloves as well, which was, I don't think any of us was shocked with those kind of sort of tactics from the Tories. But they were talking about how basically the systems of ordering these things are just old and require modernising. And I know we talked about it on the last stream, sort of around the sort of the 2016 Operation Cygnus, I think it was, in respect of the preparedness of the United Kingdom in a situation like this, where a pandemic, I think this was following SARS really, and seeing how well we would be prepared in such a situation. And it was really it was interesting to hear, I mean, especially for a BBC programme to uncover, but there was some mass failings, and they were talking to various different doctors and medics and whatnot as well. And we've heard reports subsequent as well, I mean, that's come out in the last 48 hours of doctors buying their own PPE, really, which is absolutely staggering, really, in a country, fifth richest economy in the world, and how the health service has actually been neglected. And I think, on a personal note, on a personal level, I think, what obviously want to move on away from COVID, but what lessons do we learn from this? Not just for the health service, but general life, really, in terms of how we invest in human life.
I think I mean, by the sounds of it, then part of the issue, and I do say part of the issue, seems to be something that's affected a lot of facets of this response to coronavirus, which is just the fact that we were in a very ill-prepared state in the first place. So we can say that we didn't necessarily have enough stockpiles or proper plans in place for some kind of an epidemic. I think I'm right in saying, I can't be quoted on where I saw this, but I think that some of the plans that were in place for a sort of epidemic was actually for something more similar to a bird flu or a swine flu or something that we've seen in the past. And obviously COVID-19 is a slightly different beast from all that anyway. But then again, I think that there's sub-elements of it where you can say, well, this is a thing that has taken, this is the thing that has affected the entire world, and many countries are struggling or were caught unawares by it. But there is that fact that we knew about it months ahead. There is the fact that we were so-called a few weeks ahead of certain other European countries. Now, how much you can realistically do within a couple of weeks there, I'm not sure. I'm not the person to ask about the ins and outs of procurement and things along those lines, but certainly in a more general sense, whether it's stockpiling in the event of an epidemic like this, or even just the overall state of the NHS after 10 odd years of the Tories being in, you can certainly say that going into this thing, we didn't have the best footing that we could have had. But I take that as a bit of a given. It's like, I'll blame them for that, and I do, but what I'm interested in now, at least, is what they're doing with the present situation, because we already know that we didn't have our best foot forwards with this thing, but how are they going to get us out of it in a good way, or in any way for that matter? That's I guess what I want to focus on, what I'm looking for at the moment, at least.
Thanks, Swiss. Guys, I am Harry Khan. This is Youth Views, and we are talking about COVID-19 currently. We would urge our viewers to subscribe to the channel and share the content. We are a very new channel, only started some months ago. We're not making any profit off this. This is our own time. This is our voluntary time. And somebody who quite nicely has pointed out in the comments that I am not very young, which is nice.
How old are you, out of interest? I'm not sure if I've asked.
I'm 38. Actually, just my birthday a few days ago, last week.
I'll tell you what, you look younger than 38. I would have taken you for very late 20s, early 30s. So make of that what you will.
Thank you. Tell that to the guy in the comments. Yeah. So listen, what this is, guys, is this is a platform to provide young people to discuss politics and current affairs. I don't think it necessarily needs to qualify any of us to be young. This is not discriminatory. Anybody is welcome to come on, young or old. But yes, the channel is called Youth Views. So yeah, what I would ask is viewers to follow us on Twitter at Youth Views, subscribe to the content, please, and help us grow this. A little bit later, we're going to be touching on alternate media, and I want to be getting Swiss's views on that a little bit later. But Tom, let's ask you now, because you're a Labour Party expert on the internals and the rumours that go on, and I know that John as well will have some thoughts on this. But it's been I think 2 weeks or so, maybe more than 2 weeks, since the leaked Labour report that the poison challenge that we are forbidden to even talk about or mention. Good thing that this is YouTube, and we won't have any legal libel against us, hopefully. hopefully on this, because I'm not making any profit on any of these on this channel at all. So nobody could sue me. So let's, Tom, talk about that. What's the update on that? Has there been any? We know that the NEC has now put a terms of reference together in respect of how what kind of things will be looked at on this report, and I believe there's some positive things around that. We know that there's been a panel agreed as well. We're going to be carrying out this inquiry, but no suspensions.
I'm sorry, I missed that last bit. Then what you say?
I said that it's been a couple of weeks since the Labour leaked report has been leaked. But although there's been a terms of reference and there's even a panel that has been decided upon who will be investigating this issue, but there hasn't been any suspensions as yet.
Yeah, it's rather odd. Well, I'm not particularly surprised, but it has been very silent. I've heard absolutely nothing in regards to it. No suspensions, which is a bit of outrage, to be honest, considering some of the comments that were leaked. And of course, Keir Starmer, being a man of the law himself, argues that this is, of course, a leaked report and wasn't meant for his or the public eyes yet. But still, this has happened. This is actual fact. Whether he's supposed to know or not at this point is irrelevant. Everybody knows that he should be acting. And his weakness, and this early on, it is not a good sign. And it kind of shows his weakness within PMQs as well. And again, it's kind of shocking how they've suspended nobody, because some of the comments were absolutely appalling. Yeah. But yeah, sorry, that's all I've got to say on that.
Yeah, I mean, Swift, I mean, just taking your view on it, I know that it may be not an area that you may have focused too much on your previous streams and whatnot. But Keir Starmer said that he wouldn't be messing around when it came to racism, and he would be almost suspending on sight. Really, now we know that, albeit it's a leaked report, but there's certainly some genuine-ish looking details within that. Should there have been some suspensions in your view?
I mean, first of all, I think the fact that the report was ultimately leaked because they'd decided not to publish it probably says that, and as we know, once it was leaked, there was enough stuff in there that was going to cause headaches for the Labour leadership, that they didn't really want that out there in the public domain. Should there have been suspensions? According to what my understanding of Labour's own rules about sort of, zero tolerance on different forms of discrimination and things along those lines, then I'd arguably say yes. Obviously, I'm no longer in the Labour fold personally, but my understanding of what their internal party rules are, at least, I imagine that actually to abide by them, there probably should have been some suspensions pending investigation.
Yeah. Most organisations would have suspensions, given what we supposedly have heard.
Yeah, my take from this, to be honest with you, is that I don't know if you're familiar with the thick of it, if you've seen much of that before.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's definitely recommend it. It's very good political satire. But basically, there's a thing in the thick of it where there's a big crisis blowing up in their face, and they say, "Oh, don't worry, we'll just have an inquiry. We'll have an inquiry into it," and that's kind of seen as brushing off into the long grass a little bit. We'll have an inquiry. There we go, done and dusted. So I imagine maybe what the leadership team Starmer was probably hoping for is that they'd announce, okay, we're going to do an investigation into this leaked report. We're going to find out what's going on. Yes, people will be seen to if necessary, if that's what we've determined at the end of the thing. But my reading of the situation really is that they'd just quite like this to go away, probably. I think they'd much sooner not be talking about this right now, and be focusing on, I don't know, the response to coronavirus or other things. But obviously, from what I saw in there as well, keeping in mind that back at the time in question, 2017, along those kind of lines, I was, a very much signed up and committed Corbyn supporter at the time. I wanted to see them win the general election, and it was rather appalling to think that you had people within the party hierarchy in HQ who are actively willing the party to do badly electorally. That's really the opposite of what you think any staff working for Labour is supposed to be about. So I think there's
you mentioned being a Corbyn supporter, Swiss. Had that hijack not taken place, hey?
Well, you never know. It's hard to tell, isn't it? If we're talking about a different scenario where Labour had won power in 2017, it could have gone off in all kinds of different directions, couldn't it? But the fundamental, as I'd put it, is this: that rightly so, I think that there's a group within the Labour Party, I'll call it the Labour left for lack of a better phrase, who rightly feel that they've been wronged as a result of what has been exposed in this report. And they want answers for it, and they want accountability for it as well. And that's why they're pushing for it. Whether or not they're going to get that in any kind of due time frame, I honestly can't really tell you. I just have to sit back and wait and see, to be honest. I'm probably not overly hopeful that whatever comes out of this will satisfy the people who want answers.
And John, there were developments then later, subsequently this week. Just if you could just for the second, just go on mute, and then because I just hear that feedback, John. Sorry. So yeah, John, what I was going to ask you is if you'd heard about the slap on the wrist for Dianne Abbott and Bel Ribeiro, two MPs that joined a Zoom call this week, which allegedly were alongside. I mean, obviously, I've been on a Zoom call before, and you don't have control of who joins. Sometimes these things are quite open, and anybody could join, and it's not your fault that expelled members' speech marks have joined. So yeah, Dianne Abbott and Bel Ribeiro were on this call apparently, talking about issues about the Labour Party and trying and stopping people from leaving, i.e. members. But it appears from reports that both Dianne Abbott and Bel Ribeiro, certainly Dianne Abbott is one of the main ones that's been mentioned, received a bit of a dressing down from the leadership, i.e. Sir Keir Starmer, around sharing a platform. You heard about this one, John?
I've heard bits and pieces of it. I do know that I think the board of Jewish directors want her suspended or something.
Deputies, yeah.
Board of deputies want her suspended and stuff. Now, whether or not that's actually going to happen, my guess is your guess is as good as mine. I mean, on one hand, there'll probably be some people that'll be happy that Dianne Abbott is gone from the Labour Party, because unfortunately, let's see, not many people in the public like her. Heck, when I revealed to my mum about the initial leaked report, I know her and I ended up saying something you shouldn't really say to your mother, but hey, as a response. But let's see. But anyway, but on one hand, if Keir Starmer does do this, well, let's see, I don't think he's going to unite the party, because I think there's a lot of people in the left internally in Labour are kind of rather sympathetic of Dianne Abbott's treatments of abuse that she's endured over the years. And mentioned, I think, with this current like the reports, I mean, from the looks of it, the people are going to be that should be suspended aren't really going to get suspended at all that much. Maybe some of them will, but there'll be a lot of people that still feel like Keir Starmer isn't doing enough and stuff. So I think come 2024, we're not going to get a united Labour Party. We're going to get one that is still embittered by the factions that have been building up over the last 5 years, and maybe even longer than that. But yeah. But yeah, honestly,
yeah. Sorry, go on. You were saying.
So, but yeah, I suppose going back to the Dianne a bit. Let's see. Personally, I'm not sure whether or not. Let's see, you should suspend someone just for being on the platform with expelled members. I mean, John McDonnell had an interview with Alistair Campbell, and he was expelled from the Labour Party for voting Lib Dem on his sort of YouTube video thing. I think you know what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I do. I do. And Tom, I guess the point that I'm trying to make here out of the this discussion is that not then, Tom, a double standard that silent on the suspensions and one may argue that actually some of the details in the leak report are far more disgraceful and disgusting than just joining a Zoom call with a number of individuals who may or may not have happened to have been expelled from the Labour Party. I mean, I believe actually there's something factually incorrect within that in any case. I think certainly one of those individuals had been suspended and then left the Labour Party of their own accord. But that's beside the point. The point is that what I put to you really, Tom, isn't it a double standard? If it were the case that Dianne Abbott did receive a dressing down, yet Sir Keir Starmer has been quite silent on the issue of the lack of suspensions, is that not a double standard?
Well, I would say yes. Well, we all know with Dianne Abbott, she gets considerably more flack for basically anything compared to any other politician. She
the most abused politician, isn't she? I was just saying, she's the most abused politician, isn't she?
Definitely, massively. The thing about that Zoom call is she probably could have, she should have known a bit better. To be honest, I probably was a bit reckless on her part. But also, you can't control the people who join, and it's not her fault at all. And she shouldn't be being told to be suspended from the party. And I think you're perfectly right. I mean, as Swiss said, these are violations of many party rules, as what was leaked in these reports. We had literal forms of abuse, which are totally, intolerable if any MP was to act that way. And then you've also got the fact that the Labour HQ were purposefully mishandling anti-Semitism cases, which again is throwing people who actually are abused under the bus. And these are massive violations, and yet Dianne Abbott's getting flack for being on a Zoom call. Yeah, it's massive double standards, massively.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show how institutionally broken the Labour Party is.
Yeah. And Swiss, moving on to this board of deputies business, they set the 10 commandments, didn't they, for the leadership hopefuls in the campaign, and I believe all candidates subscribed. Certainly, all of the leadership candidates. I know not all of the deputy. I think it was quite well known that not all of the deputy candidates subscribed to these 10 conditions or whatever you want to call them. But what we're hearing and what we're seeing when we look at this sort of board of deputies Twitter account is that they're not happy with the lack of suspension. And in fact, I think there's been some commentators on that side saying that actually, why are we even setting the Labour Party? We should be going for expulsion. Why are we talking about suspension? I mean, for me, like I just said to Tom a few minutes ago, is that you have to be fair to all of these issues, Swiss. I think you have to, if you're going to. I mean, within the leaked report, there were realms and realms and realms of information that would allude to anti-Semitism. For example, complaints that were allegedly coming in and that were purposely being sat on to make the leadership look bad. That's vile. That's worse than anti-Semitism. That's actually weaponizing anti-Semitism, which is worse. Our Jewish brothers and sisters out there do not want to be used as a pawn in the middle of a factional Labour Party beef. So surely if the Board of Deputies have something to a gripe with how this has been dealt with or not dealt with, then surely shouldn't they be talking about the leaked report and some of the information within there?
I suppose I would say, first of all, I haven't seen precisely what it is that the Board of Deputies said, but I'm assuming from what you've said, it's along the lines of more strict action ought to have been taken against Dianne Abbott for having been in this Zoom call with expelled party members. That's the gist of it, is it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Many are you're asking, Swiss, is that who is running the Labour Party right now? Is it the Board of Deputies that are calling the shots?
I don't think we should have. I don't think that there should be external organisations holding sort of life or death for certain politicians' levels of influence over the party. I don't think that's right or appropriate. I think fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's for Labour's own processes to decide what they do about internal matters, and it's not for the Board of Deputies, for example, or any other religious, political think tank organisation, what have you, whoever they may be. I don't think it's for them to be dictating what ought to happen. Certainly, you do raise an interesting point that, okay, they're critical of Abbott about having been within this Zoom call, but apparently not necessarily having said much on the content of the leaked report and that pertaining to the suppression of some cases being investigated. Now, again, I've just got to take your word for that for the time being, because I don't know what they have or haven't said on it. But assuming that is all what the case is, there could be an argument to be made that this does seem like a little bit more of a partisan response than just a straight up kind of, trying to uphold whatever these whatever these values are for trying to fight anti-Semitism. But you've always got to be careful when talking about this kind of thing, because very quickly you can find yourself being dragged into all sorts of accusations. But on the face of what I've heard, at the very least, I'd say, just going back to the Abbott thing in general as well, it does seem a bit odd that there hasn't been any suspensions, etc., as a result of what was within the leaks, including pertaining to what people were saying about Abbott, but that yet she was given a dressing down for being in the Zoom call. But then again, I suppose it's probably fair to say on the part of the Labour leadership or whoever's making these decisions, it's not as if they have suspended Abbott for what's gone on. I think it would be a very different situation if we were going, okay, right, no suspensions had taken place with the leaked report and the things that people were saying about Dianne Abbott, but Dianne Abbott had been suspended because she was in this Zoom call. I think that would be a very serious miscarriage of right and wrong. But if it's just a matter of, well, the Board of Deputies advise Labour that they ought to be doing this and they ought to be doing that, then the Board of Deputies are free to say whatever they like. But fundamentally, it's up for the internal Labour processes to decide what's appropriate, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I just want to bring that tweet up for you, because just while you've been talking there, Swiss, my laptop seems to be working a lot faster than it has done on previous streams. Previously, I wasn't able to. Can everybody see that on screen at the moment?
No, it's loading. Oh, yeah, there we are.
Yeah, now I can see it.
Urged swift and decisive action following reports that Labour MPs have addressed an online meeting of activists, which included figures expelled from the Labour Party. Right. Yeah.
And you know what? You are right. We have to bear caution with these sorts of issues, because you can absolutely, anybody can be accused of being anti-Semitic these days. But just for our viewers, and I won't hesitate in saying that a video was made available of the Board of Deputies, one of their sort of conferences one day, and one of their ex-chairs, sort of leaders, was actually calling for Jeremy Corbyn to be sacrificed. Those was the exact words that were used. There was a sort of Jewish a term that was used, and then it was interesting, actually, and I'd urge people to go and look on YouTube and find the clip, because the chair of that particular meeting, who had the mic, said, warned the individual, not warning them to refrain from using such language, but reminded them that actually this was being live streamed out on the internet. So interesting that that individual got caught with his trousers down. But I would argue that something like that is far worse and far more detrimental to democracy and to general humanity, really, than two individuals partaking in a Zoom call with non-questionably individuals who may or may not have been suspended or expelled from the Labour Party. But I take your point there, Swiss, absolutely. I think what the final segment that we wanted to move on with, and I'm happy for anybody to lead and move forward on this, really, Swiss. I'm saying Swiss, but I probably am asking you to kind of start on this one, is the accusations, certainly on social media, more so Twitter, around the new leadership of the Labour Party being weak and apologetic to the government. I mean, let's not forget here, guys, we are in the worst of it, certainly in our lifetimes, many of our viewers' lifetimes, we're in the worst crisis that this country has ever seen. You know, as we talked about earlier, there's been
the biggest crisis since World War II. Yeah,
I think that's a fair comment there, John. Biggest crisis since World War II, and obviously, given that many of us, certainly myself, I know I was accused of being old earlier, but I wasn't alive. World War II was happening. Certainly, with a crisis like this, with 30,000 deaths, I agree with commentators and people who are saying that we shouldn't be playing partisan politics. This isn't about which party. This is about constructive criticism. This is about calling out, as you said earlier, Swiss, that we had locked down a little bit too late. But some may argue that Sir Keir Starmer taking on, and I said this in the last couple of streams, it's a very, very difficult time that he has taken over as a Labour Party leader, and nobody would have dreamt to have taken that role on in this crisis. But many would say that his presentations at question time in Parliament, his media appearances, including actually not just Keir Starmer, but Angela Rayner. And we know Angela Rayner is quite a gobby individual. I saw her in the general election. She was, in fact, there was this one program she was on in the general election. I was like, send Corbyn home for the debate. Send Angela Rayner. She was absolutely magnificent. She was on the point. She was straight. She was gobby. She wouldn't let anyone talk over her. But she appears to have pressed her own mute button at the moment, some may say, Swiss. So this is the sort of final segment before we talk about independent media in the very, very last bit. Would you agree with some of those statements? And what do you think the strategy is for the Labour Party at the moment with their silent stance?
Oh, okay. Oh, well, there's a lot to unpack there, isn't there? I'll start by saying that I'm still personally getting a bit of a feel for what I make of Keir Starmer at the moment. Obviously, he's been in the job for a little while. It's a very unusual time for someone to be taking over as leader of the party. So, but partly I've also got to say I'm not exactly sitting here ready with a shopping list of saying I'd prefer him to be doing this rather than a very specific take. I think the strategy from the Labour leadership at the moment, and possibly why, if you've said about Angela Rayner having the mute button hit recently as well, it seems to me certainly that probably the strategy from the Labour leadership and what they've been briefing their shadow cabinet MPs and others to do is very much trying to ease off on what we'll call kind of overt partisan criticism of the government, which is, in regular times, what you always get: Labour going after Tory, Tory going after Labour. What's appropriate is about targeting what's useful, focused criticism. So like I've said, lockdown should have been brought in sooner. There have been more medical supplies stockpiled but driving those at the government at this moment in time isn't going to achieve anything. It's not going to materially change anything on the ground in what we're doing in the response right now. Questions, however, on how many tests are taking place right now and how much PPE is being distributed right now. So I think part of that is him trying to come across as sort of, I want to be constructive in what I'm doing. I want to be shown that I'm not trying to score points. We're trying to work with the government where necessary. But of course, what that also ends up meaning about what else he's trying to do. But certainly you can say when there's certain things out there that Piers Bloody Morgan is taking a harder line on and offering more, it does tend to fall down sort of Labour factional lines as well, though. I'd say that kind of the Labour left and the former Corbyn supporters or those who may have backed, say, Rebecca Long Bailey in the leadership contest, I've noticed that they tend to be a lot more critical of Starmer's approach, whereas those from sort of the Labour soft left and the right, Blairite wing of the party.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And Tom, just want to bring you in at this point. I mean, we've been forensic, we're assessing week by week since Sir Keir Starmer has been become was voted leader of the Labour Party. We've been, Tom, haven't we, in respect of how he has acted as an opposition. How do you think he's getting on at the moment? Do you think he's giving too much ground?
I think he's just been awfully weak. And I get it's a time of crisis. People want unity. People don't want point scoring in the house of the opposition, mate. What do you mean you're disappointed? The government doesn't know the own statistics for the amount of its own citizens' deaths in care homes. Like, what do you mean you're disappointed? Like, I mean, that is a bit of a piss take there. I mean, maybe he should be a little bit harder on the Tories. And again, I get why he's being a bit like that. I suppose Piers Morgan criticising the government over their own party leader really does speak the volumes. Yeah, it's the opposition's job to be unreasonable, if you will, in order to provoke a response from the government to do what is reasonable, if you will. So again, this sort of arse-licking on Keir Starmer's behalf should really stop. He needs to be demanding a better response from the government. They need to be criticising the government in order to come up with better strategy to manage this. And also in the future, because the government have botched this, and people may in the future come to blame the Tories, ideally Labour wants to be in the position where they go, oh, we were against this then and we're against it now. He needs to be an opposition leader at the end of the day. So, yeah, I think he could do more. I understand what he's doing. And this pandering he's doing is, necessary to a degree, but it's gone a bit far. He still needs to be leader of the opposition at the end of the day.
Fair comment, Tom. And finally, to you, John. I mean, some may say, the cynics out there will say, that Keir Starmer is an establishment installation. He's a soft Tory. He's funded by donors who funded Tory previously. He is there just to keep the status quo. All of these policies he's spoken about in his leadership campaign will either be watered down or won't exist in the manifesto whenever it comes out. And actually, people will say that actually there's no coincidence that actually even the Tories were pleased that Keir Starmer was installed as a leader of the opposition. Are you, John, following that cynical view, or are you just thinking that maybe he's a weak leader? Or
to be fair, to be fair to Keir Starmer, I don't really think he's some Blairite or some like Tory light or anything. I think he's probably like a social democrat or soft left, like Ed Miliband. The only debate I suppose you could argue if he's going to be dragged to the right by, let's see, the right of the party, the Blairites, and
like Edwards, yeah,
that might end up being the case because who knows? But yeah, but yeah. At the moment, I suppose it is a bit hard to like criticize the government. Let's see, in this sort of like rally behind the flag situation, as when you're doing a crisis, you get behind the government unless the government is massively screwing up this situation. But sorry, what?
Deaths nearly sounds quite a high number to me. So I was just said 30,000 deaths sounds quite a high number to me, mate.
Yes, of course, but at the moment,
some may argue that.
Yes, yeah, but at the moment, for the most part, the public is still behind the government. I mean, it's declined a bit and all that stuff, but it's not enough where I think you can be openly hostile to what the government is doing and stuff. I mean, at the moment, Keir Starmer has very similar approval ratings to Boris Johnson at the moment, and in some cases has more high approval ratings than Corbyn could ever dream of, because, well, the public just hated him that much, sadly. Let's see. Yeah. I think he could be doing more, like, criticising the government on this issue and stuff. And I think he's holding back a bit. Let's see. granted, if the death toll increases and more incompetence with like the testing, the PPE, and stuff like, I would expect him to try and at least hopefully. But I expect him to try hard, or think he should hard balance a bit by saying you're saying you're improving, but at the same time we're still getting this amount of deaths. We're not really improving our situation all that good. You still got like all this going on. Oh, that just so the public may slowly turn on the government and stuff. But yeah, I suppose. Okay. On one hand, you need a balance of, so you don't want to be seen as too critical, but I guess at the same time, you don't want to be seen as too uncritical. Otherwise, you look a bit weak in the long term.
Yeah, fair comment. Swiss, the next Prime Minister's questions with the face-off between Boris Johnson and Sir Keir Starmer will be interesting, won't it?
This was skipped this week because Boris's baby was born.
That's right. Yeah, we got Starmer Raab. So yeah, I am looking forward to actually seeing the first facing off between Starmer and Boris. You know, Prime Minister and leader of the opposition actually against each other again. A couple of things I just want to say on what John Cooper had said on the opinion polling. I find that quite interesting. That perhaps some of the direction that Starmer and Labour are taking is trying to. Because, you know, if you look at this polling that's conducted where it asks things like, do you think that the government is handling the coronavirus crisis well or badly? Yes, in the past week it's dipped a bit, but on the whole, you've still got a net positive rating for them. You see in the voting intention polls that the Tories have been up somewhat on what they were maybe 1 or 2 months ago. Although that said, that is a thing that you see with most countries. There's sort of an incumbency factor, I think, because we've had the same in Scotland with the SNP, where obviously Nicola Sturgeon's calling the shots as well. So I think partly it's just, you know, if you're there and you're in charge and you're seen to be doing something, even if it's not necessarily everything or in good time, nonetheless, they'll still go, oh, well, we're doing something. So I wonder if maybe that maybe also factors into Starmer's approach of thinking, well, if the country or a large segment of the country is currently behind the government or at least not overly critical of the approach, we want to try and reflect where the country's at. But I'll reiterate what I said earlier, which is I'd probably agree with you that I still think he's coming across as a bit soft. I'd give him a 5. I'll give him a 5.5 out of 10, which is probably more generous than some of the more left-wing members of Labour have on Twitter, from what I've seen. A few people calling for his head already. But I'd like to see him ramp it up a bit, because here's the thing: even with him going with the softly approach, you're still seeing the response from the Tories sometimes being, oh, well, you're still trying to point score. Oh, it's not appropriate for you to be asking that to us right now. So in a sense, I mean, it's obviously a tricky line to walk. You'll get criticised on either side, whatever you do. But I think there's a sense of you're going to end up breaking some eggs, whatever you're doing. As the opposition, probably best to be a little bit more critical than not quite critical enough. I get what Starmer's attempting to do with this thing, but certainly, yeah, I'd like him to push a little bit harder. But I'll reiterate what I said before on the areas that are relevant. I'm not fussed about him grilling the government over what they weren't doing 2 months ago right now, because that's in the past. I'm interested in what they're doing now and what they're going to be doing in the near future.
I would like to say, I do think the left is being more left-wingers on our side are being a bit too harsh on Keir Starmer to resign, and he's only been in charge for like a month. I mean, we don't want to end up being like the Blairites and the Corbyn critics who didn't even give Corbyn an entire year chance before they had a botched attempt of a coup of trying to get rid of him.
Well, a coup is not going to happen, John, because the numbers are not there anyway.
Oh yeah, but yeah.
But I think where you are seeing divisions already unfold, you may agree, you may not, is I think your left wing MPs, your Abbotts and co are going about as business as normal. If you look at their tweeting, they're as they were when Corbyn was leader. I mean, even some of Jeremy Corbyn's tweets are quite, as they were. Where then if you see sort of some of the sort of Starmerites, if you want to call them that, are following this exactly the same approach. Obviously, I touched on Deputy Leader Angela Rayner earlier in terms of her lack of vocal. But let's wrap up on this, guys. I mean, Swiss gave Starmer a rating of 5.5, and so it would be wrong for me not to get your rating, Tom, and your rating, John. So let's start with you, John, first. What are you giving at this moment in time? What are you giving Starmer out of 10?
I suppose maybe a 6 out of 10. I mean, on one hand, he's regaining some approval ratings and points up for Labour in the polls, and now like 17 to 18 points behind the Tories rather than 20 to 25 under the last few months of Corbyn. I think regardless, that's always going to be an improvement. But at the same time, I think he's not really been handling like the internal politics that well. And in some ways, I think some of his PMQs have been a bit I haven't really watched them, but from what I've heard, not as impressive or as some of the more media people and some of the more non-Corbyn are praising him for being forensic. But again, it's really hard to say how good he's going to be at PMQs when he hasn't even gone up against Boris Johnson yet. I mean, Dominic Raab, and as many people here say, Dominic Raab is probably one of the most beatable Tories we can get. Some even said that if he was leading the Conservatives in the 2019 election, Labour might have managed to get that hung Parliament or not. But hey.
Okay.
After Tom's given his rating, can I just say one very quick word on opinion polls as well?
Yeah, sure. Tom?
Okay.
Oh, well, I mean, of course I want, as a leader, for me, I want a man who can, or a woman, if you will, a leader who can get us into government while simultaneously upholding the same principles of which I relate to. So, to be fair, he's not a Blairite. I support the majority of his views, and he's done well in the opinion polls. In the House of Commons, he's not been the most effective opposition leader, no, but at the end of the day, opinion polls has gone up, as John has pointed out. So far, yeah, I suppose he is doing a good job. So yeah, I'm going to have to give him, about a 5 or 6, really. He's doing
we can't sit on the fence on this show, Tom. We have to go 5 or 6. I gave
5.5 like me.
I'll give him a 6.
You're giving it 6. Okay, that's good. Okay. So, I mean, I guess I should give my rating as well. I think, look, let's be honest, hardly anybody watches Prime Minister's Question. And so that's not really the biggest thing in the world for me, although I think I agree with pretty much everything that Swiss says he's been weak there. I think the thing that I would like to see more from Keir Starmer is this repeated drop this, we need to see an exit strategy line, and talk a little bit more about the concerning numbers. The fact that if you compare to other countries like New Zealand and Germany, I know Germany's had a little bit of a spike, but they're quite reactive to that spike, is that we're doing disgracefully. And I'm not saying that I would like him to use those words, but I think he needs to be a little bit more accountable. 28,000, nearly 30,000 deaths is an appalling number. And I think we just need to call a spade and not allow Boris Johnson and his government to get off the hook with this. I'm going to give him a 4.5. I'm not far off the halfway mark. I'm going to give him a 4.5. I think, and this is taking my bias away. I'm not calling him a Blairite or anything like that. For me, the jury's still open on him, and I want to see a manifesto to really, really, truly rate this guy. I want to see him. Interesting how Layla Moran from the Lib Dems is talking about not allowing company owners, CEOs who have tax havens abroad to subscribe to the furlough scheme. I think this needs to be him. I think this needs to be Keir Starmer leading that front. And believe me, when we talk about internal strategy in terms of what he wants to do and bring the two sides of the Labour Party together, he just needs to say that. He just needs to come out with a statement like that, and the Toms of the world and the Guys of the world and the John Coopers all be going, see, he is got this soft leftness about him, and what he would be saying would actually be within tune with the public. You know, if you look at many of Corbyn's policies, he may not have been as popular as a leader or as a person or an individual, but a lot of his policies in terms of taking from the top earners and distributing it equally were very popular policies. I think he's a lawyer, he's a really intelligent man. He needs to just play into that a little bit more and say, and not allow himself to be scoring own goals and allow Twitter meltdown to be saying, look, Layla Moore on the Lib Dems, those who went into coalition with the Tories in 2010, even she's saying things that Labour should be saying. I think he needs to be a bit more careful. Therefore, 4.5 out of 10 from me.
Can I say that word about the polling quickly? And also on the Layla Moran thing, because I saw what you said about, and I absolutely agree with it, by the way. I think that companies that have been not paying their fair share of tax in the offshore tax havens, we know that that's something that the Tories really don't pay an awful lot of mind to, really. I'd certainly like to see, you know, not necessarily to say, okay, you haven't paid tax in the past, that's it, you're done with, but sign up to a firm commitment or bring some new rules in to say you're going to have to be paying it properly in the future. But I saw a thread on Twitter from Ed Miliband, who's obviously shadow business now. And you saw it as well. So I think there was something in that thread that was on a similar kind of vein to what Layla Moran had said. So I wonder, given that he's in the shadow cabinet, maybe that having been put out by Miliband, probably it would have had to have been okayed by the leadership, you know, given a rubber stamp at least to say, yes, if you're talking about these kind of measures. I'd assume at least maybe. So that's not to give Starmer any credit for it, because he hasn't been pushing for that personally whatsoever. But maybe we may see that in the future if at least the person in charge of that department on Labour seems to be on board as well. And then just on the polling very quickly.
Miliband for leader. Call for the return of Miliband for leader.
I wouldn't mind it, to be honest with you. I could go for round 2 of Miliband. I'll say this very quickly on the polling, though. First of all, on Starmer's personal approval ratings, those are looking good with an asterisk. They're certainly improved on what Corbyn's were, but there's also a lot of not sures and don't knows right now. So from what we've got so far, it's looking pretty good, but there's many out there yet to make their mind up. And then just a final word on when we get these voting intention polls in as well, because I'm a very big nerd for polls. I love my opinion polls. And there's one thing that I think sometimes people miss when I look through the comments of people replying to these polls coming out. It's really important to look at the change versus the last time there was a poll. So there might be a poll that comes out and, say, for example, it has the Tories up 1 or 2 points and Labour down 1 or 2 points. And then they'll go, aha, this is the Starmer effect since he became leader. But then if you look at the change against, as in when the last poll by the same company was, sometimes the last poll may have been January. Sometimes the last poll may have been the election. And in that sense, it's a little bit more hard to determine, because you've had several months of Corbyn still and then a month and a half of Starmer. And you don't really know whether in that meantime Labour's gone up a bit, down a bit, what have you. You've just got where you are now versus where you were before. So in terms of measuring the Starmer effect specifically, the polls that you really want to be looking at are ones that say change versus a period of time within the last month or two. That's more accurate and better for trying to judge how Starmer's affected the ratings.
Pav2 in the comments says, Ed Miliband Reich.
I just want to comment on the Lib Dem thing. That, of course, we're all agreeing with Lara Moore yet. It should be pointed out she is not leader of the Lib Dems yet. And for all we know, someone like Ed Davey might end up being a Lib Dem leader, and we have no idea where he stands at the moment.
We're just agreeing with the sentiments, I think, John. I think she's really hit the point, really, and this is what I was saying is that I think we need to be more in that direction and really calling, and that's not criticism. That's actually, this is a fair point that's been made, really. Finally, just before we go, guys, by the way, I'm Harry Khan. This is Youth Views. Please like, subscribe, share the content. We are a new channel. We started off some months ago, and we want to grow, and we, you know, moving on to the next feature, the very final feature, is that we are in possibly, Swiss, the most important times now in terms of the left and which way, which direction the left will go in. I want to just very quickly touch on just a segment that we touched on earlier in terms of how BBC had reported, without any scrutiny whatsoever on those 100,000 tests per day, almost celebrating with the government about them, almost gloating with the government about that number, which, as we've discussed, has turned out to be a not genuine number. I think all will agree, all neutral and unbiased will agree. What we are in the age of social media, Swiss, and you've been YouTubing for a little while now, and I would, alongside many others, count our work in terms of what we're doing now as independent media. So, you know, we scrutinize, we talk about things that you will not find on Newsnight on a 10:30 on BBC Two in the evenings. How important, Swiss, from your own experience, is having people like us, or you know, institutions like ourselves, and independent media, in terms of getting truth out there, or certainly a version of the truth?
I think there's absolutely a role to play, first of all. I mean, probably I wouldn't say anything otherwise, because then I'd be selling myself short for what I'm supposed to be doing here on YouTube as well, and you for that matter. I think there's absolutely a role to play, especially if we look at what we'll term the mainstream media and say, okay, there's a fixed amount of opinions that they'll have on there. There's an overall sort of narrative or a center of gravity where most of the opinions end up coming. And if there's views outside of that, then if they're not necessarily going to get a frequent airing, you need other avenues for them to be able to do that. I'd say it can sometimes be a double-edged sword also, though, that much in the same way as people might go, well, if you're always plugged into just the BBC, you're only going to get a very thin view on the thing. Likewise, we've always got to be incredibly wary of echo chambers anywhere that they could pop up. So even if it ends up being a more critical voice or platform, if people were to end up only getting their news from that alternative platform, I'd almost say that might be as bad as just getting it from a mainstream one. I think you absolutely need to try and draw from different perspectives: mainstream, alternative, online, written, television, etc. You know, I think that's sensible. And as far as what I consider myself to do, at the very least, I'd always stress to say that I would not describe myself as a journalist. I'd describe myself as a commentator, because in my view, a journalist supposedly goes out and finds out the news. They're the ones who get first-hand sources from people. They go and do a bit of investigation. Journalists bring the news to you. And a commentator, I'd say, is a person who appraises the news. You know, the journalists provide the news, and a commentator appraises what is happening in the news and offers their own views on it. Because I certainly wouldn't, you know, I do my very best, I think, to try and be even-handed in the way that I approach things. But I wouldn't ever want to claim that I had a level of unbias in the way that the BBC is supposed to be, you know. That's simply not the case. I'm always going to be offering at the end of the day what my view on the thing is as well. So I'd always want to make that very clear to people watching my stuff. But yeah, there's absolutely a role to play for alternative media out there, provided alternative media tries to check their facts as responsibly as the mainstream media ought to, and that people watching alternative media continue to try and take things in from multiple sources. I think it's absolutely a good thing to have different voices out there, sometimes posing different perspectives or questions on what's going on.
Yeah, no, and as one of our quite pointed out earlier, that I'm not as young as I try and make myself out to be. I think it's fitting that we go to the youngest on our panel tonight, Tom. Tom, I know you're quite active on social media and Twitter, and you like to do your research and you read. Are you familiar with the likes of Squawk Box, the Canary, Labour List? Are these sort of publications and entities that you do refer to, or are you just simply BBC, ITV, Peston, Question Time, that kind of stuff?
Oh, it's a bit of a mix, really. I don't really follow Labour lists. The Canary now and again, but see, I often use anything that comes up in my newsfeed. That ranges from, say, the Canary to BBC to Sky News, Financial Times, The Economist, The Guardian, The Independent, anything. I'll read anything. But the key really is just to take it all with a pinch of salt. I see. For me, I usually watch the link they provide. So if they're commenting on what happened in the House of Commons, I'll watch it for myself rather than reading it, their own opinion on it, because you can make your own interpretations rather than exactly take the opinion of them. So, so kind of, I try to keep my options open. I don't like to stick to things like the Guardian, Canary, and Labour lists only, because I find just you don't want to be in your own bubble. I like to hear a bit of interpretations from across the board. I'd say.
And I think guys, that a lot of young people are like that. I think Swiss hit the nail on the head, really, and I would have alluded to that if he hadn't said, is that it's important to listen to all sides and extract from that the different aspects and make your own mind up. But I think certainly in this day and age, a lot of young people are doing that and are very intelligent at doing that. Swiss, I saw you write something down. Any final comments before we call it a day?
Oh, I wish I'd been writing down interesting notes to share with you. I've actually just been doodling a little bit on how we've been chatting to each other. But in terms of final things to have to share, probably to reiterate the points that were made before, and what you've just said as well, trying to take things from different sources is very useful, even if sometimes it's a source that or an outlet that you yourself might go, oh well, I think these people are totally deplorable, I hate the things that they've got to say, there's no way I'm going to agree with it anyway. At the very least, sometimes it can be handy to clue yourself into what it is that your political opponents are thinking and the way in which they view things, because that can help either in arguing against them or trying to come up with more compelling ways to sell your political view of things against, ultimately everyone's playing for votes out there with the public, aren't they? But just final thing, I suppose, to say, as always, thank you very much for having me on, and I hope to be on again at some point as well.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Listen, guys, please subscribe, share the content. Independent media, you've heard it here, very, very important. And scrutinize us as well. We're happy for that. John, Tom, Swiss, as always, thanks for coming on, and we'll see you all soon.
Catch you later.
Take care, guys.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. No worries. Bye-bye.